It's Caspian. I see it's Louis. The Return to the island. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, and it has been told in another book called Unwind how they had a remarkable adventure. They had opened the door of a magic wardrobe and found themselves in a quite different world from ours. And in that different world, they had become kings and queens in a country called Narnia. While they were in Narnia, they seemed to reign for years and years. But when they came back through the door and found themselves in England again, it all seemed to have taken no time at all. At any rate, no one noticed that they had ever been away, and they never told anyone except one very wise grown-up. That all had happened a year ago, and now all 4 of them were sitting on a seat at a railway station with trunks and play boxes piled up around them. They were, in fact, on their way back to school. They had traveled together as far as the station, which was a junction, and here, in a few minutes, one train would arrive and take the girls away to one school, and in about a half an hour, another train would arrive, and the boys would go off to another school. The first part of the journey, when they were all together, always seemed to be part of the holidays. But now, when they would be saying goodbye and going different ways so soon, everyone felt that the holidays were really over. And everyone felt their term time feelings beginning again. And they were all rather gloomy, and no one could think of anything to say. Lucy was going to boarding school for the first time. It wasn't empty. A sleepy country train station, and there was hardly anyone on the platform except themselves. Suddenly, Lucy gave a sharp little cry, like someone who had been stung by a wasp. "What's up, Lou?" said Edmund, and suddenly broke off and made a noise like "ow." "What on earth?" began Peter, and then he too suddenly changed what he had been going to say. Instead, he said, "Susan, let go. What are you doing? Where are you dragging me to?" "I'm not touching you," said Susan. "Someone is pulling me." "Oh, stop it." Everyone noticed that all the others' faces had gone very white. "I felt just the same," said Edmund in a breathless voice. "As if I were being dragged along, a most frightful pulling. Oh, it's beginning again." "Me too," said Lucy. "I can't bear it." "Look sharp," said Edmund. "All catch hands and keep it together. This is magic. I can next moment, the luggage, the seat, the platform, and the station had completely vanished. The four children, holding hands and panting, found themselves standing in a woody place, such a lovely wood that the branches were sticking into them and they were hardly any room to move. They all rubbed their eyes and took a deep breath. "Oh, Peter," exclaimed Lucy, "do you think we can possibly have got back into Narnia?" "It might be anywhere," said Peter. "I can't see a yard in all these trees. Let's try and get into the open, if there is any open." With some difficulty and with some stings from nettles and pricks from thorns, they struggled out of the thicket. Then they had another surprise. Everything became much brighter. And after only a few steps, they found themselves at the edge of the wood looking down at the sandy beach. A few yards away, a very calm sea was falling on the sand with such tiny ripples that it made hardly any sound. There was no land in sight and no clouds in the sky. The sun was about where it ought to be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the sea was a dazzling blue. They stood breathing in the sea smell. "By Jove," said Peter, "this is good enough." 5 minutes later, everyone was barefooted and wading in the cool, clear water. This is better than being on a stuffy train on the way back to Latin and French and algebra, said Edmund. And then, for quite a long time, there was no more talking, only splashing and looking for shrimps and crabs. "All the same," said Susan presently, "I suppose we'll have to make some plans. We shall want something to eat before long. We've got the sandwiches Mother gave us at the journey," said Edmund. "At least, I got mine." "Not me," said Lucy. "Mine were in my little bag." "So are mine," said Susan. "Mine are in my coat pocket there on the beach," said Peter. "That'll be 2 lunches among 4. This isn't going to be such fun." Everyone else now felt thirsty, as one usually is after wading in salt water under a hot sun. "It's like being shipwrecked," remarked Edmund. "And in the books, they always find springs of clear, fresh water on the island. We'd better go and look for them." "Does that mean we shall have to go back into that thick wood?" said Susan. "Not a bit of it," said Peter. "If there are streams, they're bound to come down to the sea. And if we walk along the beach, we're bound to come along them." They all now waded back and went first across the smooth, wet sand, and then up the dry, crumbly sand that sticks to one's toes, and began putting on their shoes and socks. Edmund and Lucy wanted to leave them behind and do their exploring with bare feet, but Susan said this would be a mad thing to do. "We might never find them again," she pointed out. "And we shall want them again if we're still here when night comes and it begins to be cold." thirsty. The children's feet, after the change from the cool water, felt hot and heavy. Susan and Lucy had raincoats to carry. Edmund had put down his coat on the station seat just before the magic overtook them, and he and Peter took it in turns to carry Peter's greatcoat. Presently, the shore began to curve around to right. About a quarter of an hour later, after they had crossed a rocky ridge which ran out to a point, it made quite a sharp turn. Their backs were now to the part of the sea which had met them when they first came out of the woods, and now, looking ahead, they could see across the water another shore, thickly wooded, like the one they were exploring. I wonder, is that an island, or do we join onto it presently? Said Lucy. Don't know, said Peter, as they all plodded on in silence. The shore that they were walking on drew nearer and nearer to the opposite shore, and as they came round each promontory, the children expected to find a place where the two joined. But in this they were disappointed. They came to some rocks, which they had to climb, and from the top they could see a fair way ahead, and "Oh, bother," said Edmund, "it's no good. We shan't be able to get to those other woods at all. We're on an island." It was true. At this point, the channel between them and the opposite coast was only about 30 or 40 yards wide, but they could now see this was at its narrowest place. After that, their own coast bent around to the right again, and they could see open sea between it and the mainland. It was obvious that they had already come much more than halfway around the island. "Look," said Lucy presently. "What's that?" She pointed to a long, silvery, snake-like thing that lay across the beach. "A stream, a stream," shouted the others. And tired as they were, they lost no time in clattering down the rocks and racing to the fresh water. They knew that the stream would be better to drink further up, away from the beach. So they went at once to the spot where it came out of the wood. The trees were thick as ever, but the stream had made itself a deep course between high mossy banks, so that by stooping you had to follow it up a sort of tunnel of leaves. They dropped on their knees by the first round dimply pool and drank, and dipped their faces into the water, then dipped their arms all the way up to the elbow. "Now," said Edmund, "what about those sandwiches?" "Oh, hadn't we better save them?" said Susan. "We may need them far worse later on." "I do wish," said Lucy, "now that we're not forest. They find roots and berries and things. What sort of roots? Asked Susan. I always thought it meant the roots of trees, said Lucy. Come on, said Peter. Ed is right. And we must try to do something. It'll be better than going out into the glare of the sun again. So they all got up and began to follow the stream. It was very hard work. They had to stoop under the branches and climb over the trees, and they blundered through the great masses of stuff like rhododendrons and tore their clothes and got their feet wet in the stream. And still, there was no noise at all, except the stream and the noises they were making themselves. They were beginning to get very tired of it when they noticed a delicious smell and then a flash of bright color high above them at the top of the right bank. I say, exclaimed Lucy, I do believe that's an apple tree. It was. They panted up the steep bank, forced their way through some brambles, and found themselves standing round an oak tree that was heavy with large, yellowish, golden apples as firm and juicy as you could wish to see. And this is not the only one, said Edmund with his mouth full of apple. Look there, and there. Why, there are dozens of them, said Susan, throwing away the core of her first apple and picking her second. This must have been an orchard long, long ago, before the place went wild and the wood grew up. Then this was once an inhabited island, said Peter. And what's that? Said Lucy, pointing ahead. By Jove, said Peter, it's a wall. An old stone wall. Pressing their way between the latent branches, they reached the wall. It was very old and broken down in places with moss and wallflowers growing on it. But it was higher than all the tallest trees. And when they came close to it, they found a great arch, which must have been a gate at one time, but was now almost filled with the largest of all the apple trees. They had to break some of the branches to get past, and when they had done so, they all blinked because the daylight became suddenly so much brighter. They found themselves in a wide open place with walls all around it, and here and there were no trees, only level grass and daisies, and ivy and gray walls. It was a bright, secret, quiet place, and rather sad. And all four stepped out into the middle of it, glad to be able to straighten their backs and move their limbs freely. That's chapter 1. If you liked this cozy reading corner, please make sure and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I've created a video for you. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe so that I will be able to make more videos for you. The more subscriptions I have on the channel, the more likely I'll be able to turn the channel into a bigger success. So I thank you so much for joining me today and for watching this cozy ASMR whisper